Well, this is an unfortunate story, but it really highlights what's going on right now with the average Joe and Jane. And by the way, this is a perfect example of the central planners coming in and doing all of this quote unquote stimulus in the United States. Did that help us avoid a recession? Sure, absolutely it did. But at what cost? See, now the average consumer is pinched. Their purchasing power has gone down massively from where it was in 2019, even though we avoided a recession. So you're having to pay the fiddler regardless. You can either do it short term and then build on a foundation that's far stronger, or you can do all of these government programs and just this sugar rush that just distorts the economy. So when you do inevitably have to pay the piper, then you're paying a much bigger price. And right now we're seeing the average American pay the price for the government response to the cerveza sickness that temporarily kept us out of a recession. I would argue that if you wouldn't have locked everyone in a cage and you would have let people just make their own decisions and you would not have done the stimmy checks, that yes, we might have gone through a recession, but today we would be far, far, far better off and on much stronger ground economically. All right, let's get to this article, though, that really highlights what we're talking about. And this is also on Bloomberg. So, working Americans, I remember growing up, and maybe I was just naive because I was a kid, but when I thought of food banks or food stamps or whatever the hell they're called now, that for me, the first thing that came to my mind or the impression that I had was that's just for people that don't have a job because they've got to make ends meet. They don't have a job. Therefore, they need some temporary help. Okay. But it seems like now food stamps and maybe food banks are not just for Americans that don't have a job, but who knows? They people that are making 100 grand a year could be using these things in significant percentages now. I mean, this is what happens. There's no free lunch. There's no free lunch here. You can sit there and say that America is exceptional because we avoided a recession, but that may be true, but it's not like that was achieved without a cost. And unfortunately, the people that are always going to bear the brunt of the cost is going to be the poor and middle class, but now maybe even the upper middle class. I read the other day that like 40% of people making 100 grand a year are living paycheck to paycheck. Once a month, Kirsten Eshek visits a food pantry in Virginia to stretch her family's budget. Eshek's husband works at a big box retailer. She works as a substitute teacher. So they both have a gig. They have income, but with prices up nearly 23% of the past 5 years and still rising, prices up a lot more than that. Either earnings don't stretch or their earnings don't stretch far enough. Food banks across the nation are seeing a similar story. A post-cerveza sickness wave of demand for food driven by working people caught in America's cost of living crunch. This is the new era of food insecurity. Vice President of Research at Feeding America, the largest U.S. hunger relief organization. This isn't an unemployment issue. Huh. Well, there you go right there, guys. I did not read this article prior to going live. So what I said at the beginning, I guess that to a certain extent is true as far as my initial assumption based on what it was like when I was growing up. As prices have risen, so have the share of Americans reporting they don't get enough to eat. Yeah, I don't know if it's that they don't get enough to eat. I'm suspicious of those reports or those studies, let's say. But I know a lot of them just ask like kids as an example. When they say like 40% of kids in school go home hungry or something like that, those are completely bogus because the way they ask the question. I remember Thomas Sowell did a deep dive on this where they just asked the kid, have you ever fallen asleep hungry? And the kid says sure, and they assume that's because the household doesn't have food, as opposed to the kid just went to bed hungry because he didn't eat enough dinner. But I totally understand how, I don't know that they don't have enough to eat, but they are having their budget is being pinched to such a degree that they have to go to these extremes that in past decades were pretty much reserved for people who were homeless or unemployed. They say despite robust economic growth and historically low unemployment, those figures have remained elevated since 2024. Again, this is like the stimulus question. They never, ever, 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 ever sit there and ask. I mean, the economy is booming, but more and more Americans are having to use food banks. That doesn't really make sense. I don't know. Maybe the economy isn't booming. No, no, no. There's no way that's a possibility. It's got to be something else. And then they just wave the white flag. Well, I guess we're never going to figure it out. It's a mystery. That's for it. Maybe Americans are just complaining. They're just getting fat and lazy, and they're just complaining that they have to stretch their budget when they don't even realize that they're rich. That's like what Krugman always talks about, and all these experts on CNBC. The rise in hunger, again, I don't know if it's the rise in hunger, but more so the shrinkage of the budgets, highlights what's at stake in the sharp-edged choice Federal Reserve officials. And here we go. It goes back to what I was saying earlier. Oh, well, everything revolves around the Fed, obviously. I mean, if they could just drop interest rates by 1%, then the food banks would just go away. Problem solved. Panacea, silver bullet. Or if the government would just do a little bit more of this or a little bit less of that, well, I guess it is a lot less of that. But if the government would just do a little more over here or a little more over there, then we could just eradicate this problem. No, 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 and no. If you have a very fundamentally unsound economy that's completely propped up by asset prices, this is going to happen. The Fed can't control, what's happening with people's expenses. And I mean, sure, they could jack rates to 20%, and that might lower prices. But that's the type of lower prices you don't want, because that's going to decrease purchasing power even further, because demand is going to go down a whole hell of a lot lower than the prices. Again, there's just no free lunch here. The only way that we can get back to a point where there's fewer and fewer people going to these food banks is we have to have what? You guys know the answer to this. It's not lower or higher interest rates. It's not more currency units. That's just a short-term fix, if it's even a fix at all, that makes things worse. What is the answer here? More goods and services. More goods and services. That's how you attack this problem. It's more free markets. It's reducing regulation. It's letting the entrepreneurs go out there and produce more stuff to lower the prices of what the average Joe and Jane is having to buy. This is, and that's difficult, right? Because why would we do that when we can just give out stimmy checks? Or why would we do that when we just do price controls? You see, that's the way the central planners think. That's the way they operate. Because that other thing over here, well, that's tough. That means that I actually have to work and be more productive. And I'm not saying that that's the thought process of the average American. I'm saying that's the thought process of the central planner. And they're not going to get credit for that, right? That's another thing, too, that you have to realize. The central planner, if they come out with stimmy checks, then they're going to get credit for solving the food issue. But if they come out and reduce regulation that lowers prices, well, they're not going to get credit for that. Then the entrepreneur is going to get credit for that. Walmart's going to get credit for that, as an example. You see, this is the perverse incentive structure and why we need less and less and less federal power. It needs to be as decentralized as possible. And it's not just food. It's clothing, everything, as they say further on down the article here. And this is why I have so many issues whenever you see those charts where they say, oh, well, nominal wages have gone up a lot more than the CPI. Therefore, people have more purchasing power. Now, on what planet are you living on? Show me the people that, assuming you don't own assets, that have more purchasing power now as far as their incomes than they did in 2019. I'm sure there's a few people, but on net balance, not even close. Not even close. And look at this. Their research shows the sharpest increase in food insecurity in the area were in households earning $100,000 to $150,000. How can you tell me the economy is booming when people making 150 grand a year don't have the budget to go to the grocery store? I mean, this is completely bananas. The disconnect is something that I've never seen before, as far as what the experts are saying about the economy and the data, and then what you're seeing with the boots on the ground intel, what you're hearing from your neighbor, what you're hearing from your coworker, from your friends and family, or maybe what your personal experience is. And again, I want to clarify outside of people that own assets, because you might be sitting back and say, Jordan, life is good, my friend. Are you kidding me? My house has gone up by 200%. My Bitcoin has gone up by this. My fart coin's gone up by that. Whew, I'm Scrooge McDuck, baby. Okay, that's fine. But now let's look at everyone else and realize that at the end of the day, you ain't getting wealthier, my friend, if you have access to fewer goods and services. At the end of the day, that's what it's all about. They say, but booming demand significantly exceeded the economy's ability to supply goods and services between mid 2000. Yeah, why was that? Maybe that's because the government's locked everyone in a cage and destroyed global supply chains. Let's put the blame and the responsibility on the shoulders of who actually created the problem. The Fed failed to carry out the mandate of fostering price stability. That's because price stability, idiot, comes from increasing supply. It's increasing supply, for heaven's sakes. What you're trying to do is decrease demand and then sit there and scratch your head and wonder why these people have less purchasing power. Why is the cure for high prices high prices? You guys know this. Is the cure for high prices just because people have more money? No. The cure for high prices is high prices because it incentivizes additional supply to come online. Fantastic. How are you going to incentivize additional supply by increasing interest rates? Geez, eggs are up 80%. I didn't know that. That's since 2019. And this is BLS, Bureau of Labor Statistics, which is basically Bureau of lying statistics. 80%. My goodness gracious. The gutting of American purchasing power was a key factor in the 2024 presidential election. Absolutely it was. I completely agree with that. Helping to power Trump and Republicans to victory. It has also presented the Fed, which says it is concerned not only with overall impact of its policies, but also how that plays out for different groups with a difficult choice. Okay. See, here's where we take it to the complete level of absurdity. The Fed does not control the economy. Let's just get that straight. Okay. And if the Fed doesn't control the economy, I can assure you the Fed doesn't control the economic environment for African Americans. The Fed does not control the economic environment for women or people in a wheelchair. Or this is just where we've got to pump the brakes here and say, wait a minute. Now we're just taking this to a level of complete ridiculousness. And we need to just be honest about what the Fed can and can't do. And what they can't do, I assure you, is a lot more than what they can do. Hey guys, I'd like to personally invite each and every one of you to attend this year's Rebel Capitalist Live. This is the incredible conference I put on annually that helps you build a bulletproof portfolio. It helps you increase your personal freedom and liberty, and also it helps you increase the size of your network. In other words, you get to meet a lot of like-minded individuals, fellow rebel capitalists. It's in Orlando, May 23rd through the 25th. Past speakers have included people like Robert Kiyosaki, Ron Paul, Peter Schiff, Mike Maloney, Lynn Alden, just to name a few. So to get your tickets ASAP and to find out who is speaking at this year's Rebel Capitalist Live, you can check it out at rebelcapitalistlive.com. And just a little quick insider information, if you get your tickets sooner than later, you can get a discount because as we get closer and closer to the event, the tickets go up in price. So don't wait. Go to rebelcapitalistlive.com right now and get your tickets. And I will see you in Orlando, May 23rd through the 25th.